utility plugins, and a ton of really cool stuff. So stick around, enough of the talking, let's get straight into it. First one on the list is called Gritter 2, and it is a plugin we used a ton while creating the Tour Visual Elements pack. My favorite feature has to be the ability to organize elements on the Z-axis. In other words, that means you can create these really cool looking tunnels in a few clicks, and I'm going to show you how to do just that. First, we're going to create a new comp and add a shape layer to it. I'll use the star shape for this video, but you can use any logo that is outlined or any shape that's available in After Effects. Make sure everything is centered, and once that's done, we can create a new camera. You'll also want to duplicate your shape layers. Don't go too crazy. I'm going to do 10 copies for this. And once that's done, you can go ahead and open up the Gritter 2 plugin. From there, you've got several options. You can do 2D, 3D, or circle setup for your grid. We're going to focus on the 3D Z-axis grid. So you can go ahead and click on the XZ button. And as you can see, all the shape layers were displaced evenly on the Z-axis, creating a tunnel. If you're not happy with the spacing, you can tweak it using this parameter. And if you're getting some moire towards the center of the tunnel, you can add some Gaussian blur to get rid of it. All right. Now we're ready to fly the camera through the tunnel, and to do so, you just gotta keyframe a push-in using your camera's Z position. You can also add some rotation to it, and once that's all said and done, you have your tunnel effect. Alright, I had to plug this next one, and even though I created it, I genuinely think it is one of the coolest plugins out right now, and I'm talking about CRT Emulator. If you're familiar with the traditional CRT capture process, you know how expensive and time consuming it is, but ever since we released this plugin, things have gotten way easier. Just go ahead and create a new solid that we're going to use as a background layer. Before we run it through the CRT emulator, I also like to add a tint affected logo as well as some blur and 2 separate glow effects. By doing so, we'll get the most authentic looking results out of the plugin. Alright, that looks pretty good to me. Now what we can do is select all the layers and pre-comp everything up so that the CRT emulator effect is applied to everything all at once. If this is your first time using the plugin, just go to Window, Extension, and click on CRT Emulator. Alright, now it's time to choose a style. CRT Emulator comes built in with 12 unique CRT looks, from arcade monitors to various CRT TVs emulation, but I mostly use style 1 as it is the most versatile one. Make sure you select the pre-comp layer as well as the style you're going for, and then hit apply effect and wait for it to load. Now you'll be greeted with the settings page, and from here it gets pretty subjective. It's really going to depend on the asset you're applying it on, but in this specific case I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit and maybe lower the size of each pixel by bringing down the resolution slider a tiny bit. This already looks pretty good to me, but I usually crank the vibrance slider all the way up, and I also like to add a bit of sharpness, and I never forget the glow. If you want, you can play around with all the other settings like glitches or TV borders, but for this one I'm just going to keep it simple and hit complete so that all the layers are grouped together. And as you can see, it only took a few clicks to go from a basic white logo to something a lot spicier. This effect is also going to work on text, footage, logos, or really anything you throw at it. If you want to learn more about the CRT emulator, we've made a dedicated video on creative ways to use it. If you'd like to get your hands on it, head over to esco.tv and start elevating your work today with our full library of assets, including CRT emulator. Now let's have a look at something completely different called RealSmart Motion Blur. It is a utility plugin I use whenever I'm smoothing out footage that was shot using a higher shutter speed. You'll see it's super easy to use. Just select a layer and apply the RSMB effect to it. Just make sure you don't overdo the blur amount, as it'll drastically increase your render times, and if you're dealing with footage with a lot of fast movement, turn the motion sensitivity up to 100. As you can see on the little monitor right here, what the plugin is essentially doing is adding motion blur to fast moving elements. And once we hit playback, the footage now looks a lot smoother. Alright, next one on the list is called Deep Glow, and it is from the guys over at Plugin Everything, and I have to say I'm a fan of everything these guys come up with. Deep Glow is basically a better version of the built-in AE Glow, and it allows you to get physically accurate results super easily. So what you'll want to do is create a new adjustment layer and apply the Deep Glow effect onto it. We can then start to play around with the exposure and radius settings. Values are going to differ from an asset to another once again, but what I usually do is enable the smooth blending option. And if you're going for that retro look, you can also enable the chromatic aberration setting, lower down the intensity a bit, and now we have something that feels a lot better. Make sure you toggle on the unmold setting if you're using a text or any asset with a transparent background. And once again, just like that, we went from a basic logo to something that feels a lot more polished. You can also use the tint section to add a color to your glow. Just click enable, pick a color, and you've got something that feels completely different once again. I also like to switch the mode to soft light and to lower down the mix values to get a more subtle effect. Deep Glow has honestly become an absolute go-to for me whenever I'm working inside of AE, and this next one is also from the guys over at Plugin Everything, and I'm telling you, it is a total game changer. Just like Deep Glow allows you to get physically accurate glow, Shadow Studio brings over the same concept to shadow. Just select a layer you want shadows applied on and add the Shadow Studio effect to it. As you can see, it already looks brilliant, but we're going to go ahead and increase the softness, and if you're going for that long shadow look, make sure you bump up the distance setting. Last thing I like to do is to play around with the opacity master. I usually bring it down quite a bit until it sits perfectly with the background layer. You can also change the direction from which the shadow is being casted. I usually leave it as is, but if you're going for a different style, just know you can do so. Let me tell you, the built-in drop shadow effect inside of After Effects is gonna get you nowhere close to the results this plugin gives you in just a few clicks. Change the shadow type from normal to inner, and the logo now feels like it is embossed into the background. It is such a versatile plugin, and of course it's gonna work on dark backgrounds. And another cool trick I like to do is to change the shadow color to something a little brighter, and by doing so, you'll get a tri-dimensional glow effect. Alright. If you like glitches and distortions, you'll absolutely love this last one, and it is called Pixel Sorter. I love using it for transitions and experimental visuals, but it works really well for logo reveals. Once you've created a new comp, you can go ahead and drag your logo in it, make sure it's scaled properly, and I like to apply the effect on an adjustment layer. You can apply it straight to the logo, but I'm going to use an adjustment layer for this example. So create a new adjustment layer and add the AE Pixel Sorter 2 effect to it. And make sure you set your preview quality to full, because if you don't, you're not going to see the proper results. We can then start to play around with the settings. I usually play with the threshold and see how everything is already looking without changing anything. As you can see in this case, it's already looking pretty cool. One thing you can play around with is the angle. So if you want your effect to be vertical or horizontal, just play around with that. And to get the logo reveal effect, you just got to keyframe the threshold from a small value, which means the effect is going to be super strong, to something a little bigger. And what I did in this specific case was also keyframe the block size from 20 to 0, which means the effect is going to start with bigger lines and end up with smaller lines. You can also browse through the different triggers and sort bys, but I usually leave it on luminosity for these kinds of animations. Move over towards the end of your comp and add a keyframe to the threshold. Put 1 to completely eradicate the effect and 0 for the block size. That way the lines are at the smallest they can be. And just like that, you've got yourself the logo reveal Pixel Sorter effect. Alright, that pretty much wraps it up for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did creating it. And if there's ever a plugin from this list you consider getting for your own workflow, make sure you comment it down below. So on that note, I will see you guys in the next one.